Did the ancient Irish have laws about marriage? Well, Dagdi Agus Volcha, hi, hello, and welcome. Jon O'Sullivan from the Irish Pagan School, and I am doing a series exploring the Brehon Laws of Ireland. These are the ancient laws before colonisation of Irish society. Brehon was a Old Irish word for judge, and the Brehons were a subcategory or subgroup within the Druid order of Ireland and the structure of its people. Now, the Brehon laws applied across all different to it. It was interestingly enough for the time and era and the structure of Ireland, where we had nearly 150 different tribes to each with their own tribal chieftains, surnames, each with their own druids, essentially as well. The fact that the law applied across all of them and applied to even the top end people in society shows how detailed and important it was to the Irish people of the land itself. So, the Brehon Law was about restorative justice. It wasn't a punitive justice. So, breaking the Brehon Law wouldn't lead to you being incarcerated or slain or dismembered. Okay, so there was some where someone could claim for harm and hurt. But it did depend on society and what levels a person, the offender or the victim, held within society. But for the most part, it was restorative justice, where everything was quantified by cost and by loss, and then those quantifiable losses had to be made up by the offender, but also the offender's kin group, their family. So it wasn't an individualist society. It was a society where the kind of lowest unit group was you and your kinship and your people, your tribe, in essence. So inter-tribe conflicts and difficulties, if you couldn't cover the cost yourself, your family would have to cover the cost. And if the family couldn't cover the cost, then their lord would have to cover the cost. And if the lord couldn't cover the cost, then the chieftain would have to cover the cost. And so that meant that there was this very clear tiered structure around the status and the importance of intertribal circumstances, interfamilial circumstances, and that's where the marriage, of course, comes into it. So, neat answer, not hard to say. Yes, absolutely. Ancient Ireland did have laws for marriage and laws for divorce, and how important those actually were. So, when we're looking for information about laws around marriages and divorce, we kind of have to go into the core sections of text that deal with status and society and a person's rank and a person's kind of privilege within society. Now, I don't want to get this completely off and spin off into talking about all of the structure of Ireland. I might actually do a video on the structure in the future, but there's two texts that kind of focus more on the status of the individuals involved and the unions involved, the types of unions. And those are called the Bretha Crólige, and that's Bretha, Bretha, and then Crólige, Crólige, and also the Críth Gablach. So that's Gablach. So those are the texts really that I'm coming from. And for source and reference, I'm holding up the book, A Guide to Early Irish Law by Fergus Kelly. So this is the main resource I'm chewing through. I'm actually avidly loving it at the moment. I find myself just wanting to record audios of me just reading it, and we'll see if I do that in the future. But within the Cree Gavelach specifically, we have a subsection known as the Cáin, I'm going to pronounce this as best I can, the Cáin Lánamna. The Cáin Lánamna. So that's C-A fada I-N, Cáin, so that's laws. And then Lánamna, L-A fada N-A-M-N-A, Lánamna, which is sexual union. So the laws around marriage is about sexual union. And so it's quantifying it and breaking it down about how the interactions go. So we have nine different recognized sexual unions in the ancient Irish laws, each with their own importance and connection and structure based on whether the man comes from one side of the family, the woman comes from another side of the family, or whether the kin group or family approve of the union or not. So at the top end, kind of structurally within society, we have the Lánamnas Cov Comhincher. So I will spell that Lánamnas, L A fada N A M-N-A-S, Lánamnas, so that's a sexual union. But then Comchinchur, Comthinchuor, and this is known as the union of properties. So the Comchinchur in here is property. So it's a sexual union involving joint properties or exchange of properties. And this is the one that we see most commonly listed in very detailed, very important breakdowns of categorizations, costs, because it is dealing with people of privilege and status and people with joint properties that they are bringing into the union. I will touch on the divorce and the exiting side of the union just a little bit later on, but that's the first kind of most important and most detailed form of legal recognition. There's also then the Lánamnas Mná for Fincher or Firthincher, and that is the union of a woman on man's property. So that is a woman who marries into the man and his property. So it is actually his ownership of property. But also we have the Lánamnas Fear for Banchincher, which is the union of a man into woman's property. So there's a separate recognition for, the rights involved with a woman who marries into a wealthy man's family or a man who marries into a wealthier woman's family. Now, the marriage and there is no full exchange of, well, all of your assets then suddenly become my assets. But in a lot of these, there is an involvement or an investment that comes along with either the the man investing in the relationship by paying a bridal price, in essence. I have the word for that. It's called a coibche, a coibche. So it's almost the woman's honor price. Depending on her status within society, she would have an honor price. And so the man, in order to agree or to get consent to enter into the union, would have to pay an honor price to the woman's father in this instance. But that is based on the woman's status and who and how she is. And also, because of her status, she herself is entitled to a portion of the chubcha, the bridal price. Going back to our list of different types of marriages, there is ancient Ireland wasn't a monogamous circumstance. Polygyny was permitted and it was very widespread. It was very understood, so much so that the early Christians tried to enforce their morality on top of it and to outlaw it and make it difficult to the point that early Irish monks went back to Old Testament versions and pulled out quotes from the Old Testament, which talked about the chosen people of God being a people of many unions, and used that as a contextualized evidence to show that, there's always been polygyny, there's always been multiple marriages or multiple unions. But as much as the early Catholic Church trying to force the monogamy onto the Irish people, a lot of it was just ignored anyway. Um, which is why we have the next forms of union or sexual unions or marriages, and that is the Lánamnas Fir Achingio, and that's Thaithigtheo, which is a union of a man visiting. So, a man visiting to other people's territories, into another family, into another tribe, and like that at all, could engage with consent from kin consent and the woman's consent in a sexual union, and they are considered to be a couple. They are a recognized couple for sexual union, despite the fact that he's only just coming through and visiting. Now, there is other types of visiting and choices, and we have the Lánamnas Foxhall. Now, the fact that this has an X in the spelling means that it's a later Latin kind of instruction, because Proto and Early Irish doesn't have an X. But Lánamnas Foxhall is a woman who allows herself to be abducted. So, if a woman is within her kin group and within her family, she is looking to engage in a union or a sexual union or a marriage, essentially, with another man without the consent of her kin group and family, she can consent to be abducted. In which case, she and the partner, she and the man, he takes her away. They come out into his lands. And so, from one perspective, she is again a Lánamnas Mná for Fertinicher. She's a woman in man's property. But as far as her family is concerned, she's a Lánamnas Foxhall. She's a woman who has allowed herself to be abducted. And that changes her status. So by going into the marriage, into the man's property, he's responsible for the maintenance, for the care, for the support, but also for any costs or honor pricing issues, levies, fines, or liabilities that come along with that. And because her family, her kin group, didn't consent to the union or didn't invest in the union, by declaring it a union, a Lánamna's foxhole, that she left them without consent, they mitigate their liability because, as I said, a lot of this comes down to cost and liability. If a person, earlier on, if I said if a person commits some kind of breach of law or some kind of cost and they can't cover it themselves, their kin group is responsible for covering that. So by the family or kin group saying we didn't consent to this union, it's a anonymous foxhole, they mitigate their liability should the woman engage in some cost or some kind of difficulty in line with the laws or impact. Um, there is also a recognition of a union without anyone's consent or without anyone's knowledge, and this is a Lánamna's Chágaí, and that's T-A for I-G-I, and this is a union of secret visits. So this is where a couple decide to have their trysts, they engage in secret unions with each other, but it is still a form of recognized union. If they can prove, if something comes of it and they can prove that they have had this union of secret visits, then that means that there is some recognition of the interactions or the relationship in that way. Now, that's only seven of the nine recognized types, and the next two are they're difficult. So it is notifications or heads up for SA, um, but it was clearly notified within the Irish law that there was a union of rape, and so that it carried an honor price, it carried a cost, it carried very severe penalties for the person who engaged in that. Um, but it was still recognized. In order for it to be categorized, it was categorized as a union. So it did happen. This is what it was, and this is why, when it is proved, there is those making right, that restitution that has to be made by it. And interestingly, and quite commonly in the Irish law, if a person engaged in a union of rape and they were not or they were unwilling to make payment or make restitution for the honor price involved in that, the onus fell on the kin group to declare a blood feud against that person, not just that person, but also the person's kin group. And that's where we get into additional laws of separation. So it's possible that a wedded couple, a person who is in a union with another person, may agree to a temporary separation if they're going off on a blood feud. So I'm sorry, love, I won't be around for a while. We have to go into a separation because I got to go on a blood feud and take care of this business that has affected my kin group. Or if a person is going off to serve on ships, if you're serving in a tour, an inter-tour raid or conflict, there's a law of separations. And so this then showed that a temporary recognition was placed within the union, either for the man or the woman. Most commonly, the woman's responsibility was staying home, raising the kids, looking after the property, and looking after the contracts and the agreements. Especially in the Lánamna's Comachira, this law union of joint property, the woman's opinion in regards to any agreement or contract carries equal weight as that of the man's. And so any assurances he can give, she has to agree to, or any contracts that she wants to make, he has to support and agree to. And so it really does show that, within those structures, there was a parity or a partnership. Now, even in lower forms where, say, a woman, the mana for Ferchtinke, where a woman goes into a man's property, that doesn't mean she's without say. She has a say in certain contracts and certain agreements that the man might make, depending on like food for the household, clothing, garmentry, and her own personal possessions. She can actually give her own personal possessions as sureties for like covering for other people or agreements and promises. And that also means that if there's a liability caused by a failure for someone to make payment back or to cover for her sureties that she's given, she herself is entitled to recompense because of that, regardless of what her husband or partner might say. So it was very, very detailed. It was very, very detailed for all of these different types of unions and the recognition of these different types of unions. Interestingly, there's also, because Ireland was such a very complex, very detailed tiered structure in society. So you had an upper caste known as the Nemid, which were the privileged class. But then even within lower classes, there were people of different standing based on their produce, based on their wealth. So there was an okra, which was a kind of a layperson or a regular farmer. So they have a farm and they can care to cattle and care to grazing, and they raise kind of farm produce, and they have to make payments to their lord. But then also there's an upper echelon or upper kind of skill based on wealth known as a bóchara, which was a farmer who had a lot of cows or a lot of cattle. So if the wealth of the farm succeeded to such a degree, their status within society would improve. If a Bochara's farm continued to exceed and continue to grow, and this is all quantified, they actually break it down by if you have X number of head of cattle, X number of head of sheep, X number of space, X amount of grain, you can actually, well, actually not you, but your grandson will become a petty lord based on that wealth. You become known as a bochara or a farmer of withdrawals, essentially. You have so much wealth that you're able to then give wealth to other people to get them started. And because you're then supporting other people getting their farm started, your grandson becomes a lord, and that changes their status within society. So, because of this multi-tiered, very important structured society, there was rules about intersocietal marriages. So the expectation was that someone would marry kind of par for par. Like, if you're the son or daughter of a bochara, a wealthy farmer, then you would be expected generally to marry a son or daughter of a wealthy bochara. Now, the like for like, and that way, when both families come together, both kin groups invest equally in that relationship to get them started, to get them up and going as a family and as a unit in themselves. But it is possible for there to be unions or weddings in between of people within different statuses. So if, say, for example, a son of a lord wants to marry the daughter of a bochara, they have a literal different status within society. And in order to make sure that the union is being based on their choices, the boy and the girl, the young man or the son and the daughter coming together, the onus of investment is not equal. So if two people, I'm explaining this a little bit oddly, if two people of similar rank are coming together to be wed, both kin groups invest the same amount in that union. But if two people of different rank choose to be wed, both kin groups invest differently in that union, and the people who have to invest more is the people of the lower status. Now, this might seem odd or might seem weird, but it's the people, say the son of the Bochra who wants to marry the daughter of the wealthy lord. His family have to put up more than what the Lord has to do to invest in that relationship, to invest in that family going forward. So, from a certain perspective, yes, very restricted tiered society. Yes, very kind of caste, non-egalitarian, as is, I think is the terminology. A lot of restrictions, but it also means that people aren't buying or marrying into wealth. Like there is no advantage for you to marry a rich person because your family has to invest more than their family has to do. So it's very interesting and very fascinating for that point of view. But I did promise you information about divorce. I'm wiggling around here because my back is at me. But information on divorce. Divorce was very clearly listed in the ancient Irish laws. It was very important, very kind of detailed, and the multiple causes and grounds for divorce, but also for the breaking of these unions, the separations of these unions. Like the word, okay, so there was temporary separations, as I mentioned. Your partner has to go off to deal in a blood feud or engage in a war or travel on a ship. Um, Interesting, actually, one of the grounds for divorce is if your partner is infertile or barren. So if the person that you're in a union with is not able to provide a child for you, that is grounds for you to claim divorce. But if you don't want to divorce that person, you want to remain in that union and you do want to have children, either party has the right to claim a temporary legal separation to go and to secure a child. Either by the woman going and becoming pregnant or the man going probably to engage in a anonymous foxhole or a anonymous Shaja, the secret visits, but also could go and engage in a. Actually, no, it had to be without the people's consent. So yeah, if a man goes to engage in a sexual union with a woman and her parents don't consent about it, any child born of that is his responsibility. Her kin group don't have to take care of it, but that means he can come away with the child and bring it back, and the recognition and the status of the child born of that union is the same as any family. Like if the woman takes the temporary separation, goes away, becomes pregnant, and then comes back, the child born of her is his child. It's his responsibility, it's his family group, and they look after it together. In the same way that if he goes away and comes back with a child, that's her child. And so there was grounds for couples who didn't want to divorce, but did wanted to have children to engage and to have those associations with children in other ways. But we are going back into divorce. So impotence or being barren is grounds for divorce, but also is physical abuse that left a blemish. So, okay, yes, there's physical abuse. Domestic violence is never good, and I am going to be very clear on it. My stance, my personal stance on this is we have a difficulty with domestic violence in the world at the moment. It is being driven by an inegalitarian circumstance of patriarchal dominance. There is a war on women, and you can see it, like, and it's not foreigners, it's not migrants, it's not people coming in to come after our women in any way, shape, or form, which is a sad, toxic narrative going on. Most people who suffer domestic violence or sexual violence knew their offender. That's statistically very, very clear. It's not strangers in a dark alley. Now, in Irish law, there was rules about harm. If your harm or damage leaves a blemish or leaves a mark, then you can be divorced because of it. And that's either which way. When it also comes down to satire, though, if someone has a satire placed against them, a legal declaration of impropriety, that could be grounds for divorce. One of the extra things I wanted to include here is if a man is too fat to perform sexually for his partner, that's ground for divorce. If a man chooses to not go to the bed of his partner, that's ground for divorce. So she has the right to say, I'm sorry, he hasn't come and visited my bed, or he's too fat to engage in the sex because he's not looking after himself and he's not looking after our union. She has the grounds to divorce him on that. One of the extra things I was very surprised to find, and in a way delighted to find, is a man who is speaking about private details of the bed or private details of the coupling in a public setting is also liable to be divorced. So the privacy and the relationship, like, of your sexual union with your partners, gone around blabbing about details of that, grounds for divorce. And given that there's these multiple different types of union, it's not monogamous, it's not this one recognized by the church, etc. Like if someone is engaged in a consenting relationship, this visiting, union of visiting, and then the person comes away and starts blabbing about, oh yeah, X, Y, and Z, that's grounds for divorce. And so the fact that they were visiting, that it was consenting by the family and kin group and herself, if he starts blabbing about that, he's violated that. She can claim a divorce to their union based on that, and then he has to pay honor prices and costs and damages for him speaking out of turn about their sexual union. So I love reading more about this, and we consider ourselves experts in modern law and how the current state of our laws is so detailed and so great. But here's records going back centuries, back to the ninth century, Shenkismar, the great kind of gathering of legal traditions from Ireland. And it shows that a person speaking out the other side of their mouth about their sexual unions can be prosecuted for it. Um, so this has been a very, very interesting exploration for me. I'm continuing this on. I've done other videos on the law for trees, bees, and cats recently, but getting into it, I needed to talk about the detailed laws about people and how that affects ancient Irish society, but then also how we can learn from the laws of our ancient ancestors and apply that more in our world today. So, as I said, my guide and reference is this book. It's not coming up on the camera and it's quite shiny. It is The Guide to Early Irish Law by Fergus Kelly. Um, but there's also references online. You can go to celt.ie or UCC Celt Project and find translated manuscripts there as well to dive into this if you're interested. Or you can simply follow along as I keep doing it. But that means that you're bound to my curiosity and to follow what I'm going to be sharing with you, which I know I'm going to be scratching this. I'm not even scratching the surface. Like this is huge, and it may become a hyperfixation for the next few years of my life until I can declare myself a legal Brehon in Irish law. I don't even know if I'm going to do that or not, but I find this very fascinating, and I think we have a lot to learn by exploring the laws of our ancient past. If you would like to know more, make sure you're following along, subscribing, doing the like and follows. Check out the rest of the playlist here. And yeah, it's not only this. We don't only do this kind of content at the Irish Pagan School. We also cover cultural history, spiritual like explanations and explorations, sorry, Irish gods, mythology. So yeah, go to irishpagan.school/free. You'll find a whole list of additional free resources there, including guided meditations, free classes you can take to explore like living pagan practices. And until next time, look after yourself. Take care. Agus Lán. Goodbye.